Look at the Winchester house as it stands today. Then look at the oldest photograph that shows it before 1906. The old building climbs higher. A narrow tower rises through 7 stories. Roof lines stack above one another. Balconies and rooms occupy spaces that have since vanished. The mansion in San Jose is not the complete house Sarah Winchester built. It is what remained after an earthquake, teardown, repair, neglect, sale, subdivision, and a century of retelling. That missing height changes the meaning of the rooms below it. A stair that ends against a ceiling can look irrational if the lost floor is forgotten. A door can appear to open into nothing after the balcony beyond it has been removed. A window can face an inner wall when one building phase has enclosed another. Some of the house's famous impossibilities are not orders left by ghosts. They are scars left by time. Now pull the camera farther back. The missing floors are only the first loss. Around this mansion once spread a working California estate with orchards, ranch roads, outbuildings, staff homes, water lines, equipment, deliveries, and crews. A foreman named John Hanson kept daybooks of the work. He lived on the land with his wife and sons. Sarah's lawyer kept deeds, mortgages, checks, tax papers, and letters. Her niece Daisy lived in the house for 15 years. The great untold fact is not that Sarah Winchester hid ghosts inside 160 rooms. It is that the ghost story hid a ranch, a workforce, a family network, and a shrewd owner behind one haunted facade. That does not solve every puzzle inside the mansion. It gives the puzzles a world. The house cannot be read as a frozen diagram of one woman's mind because the object on display has its own long life. Sarah added to it. Workers kept it running. An earthquake cut away upper rooms. New owners turned what remained into a tourist business. If you value history that tests the legend against the record, subscribe to Dynasty and Dust and stay with us as we rebuild the life hidden inside this house. The familiar story begins with a widow, a rifle fortune, and a curse. In its most polished version, Sarah is told that the dead will punish her for the weapons that carried her married name. She moves west, buys a farmhouse, and builds without stopping, because the instant the hammers fall silent, she will die. Each night she consults spirits. Each morning, carpenters follow plans meant to confuse them. Stairs meet ceilings. Doors open over empty air. The number 13 appears like a private signature. The mansion becomes a trap for the dead, and Sarah becomes a prisoner of her own fear. It is a superb ghost story. It gives every strange angle a single cause. It turns grief into madness, money into guilt, privacy into suspicion, and architecture into confession. It also asks the building to prove claims that the surviving papers do not. The papers tell a different kind of story. They include deeds, mortgages, bank statements, canceled checks, tax records, certificates of sale, advice about stocks and land, and letters with a lawyer. They include Hanson's daybooks, with ranch work and Sarah's movements. They include a will, charitable gifts, family plans, and property deals. These sources are less theatrical than a séance. They are far more revealing. They show a woman who managed capital, land, workers, buildings, relatives, and her own privacy across 4 decades. They show a house that belonged to an estate with orchards, roads, outbuildings, equipment, staff housing, deliveries, upkeep, and accounts. They show that the mansion was one part of her work, not the only fact of her life. They do not provide a single sentence in which Sarah explains everything. No known diary resolves her purpose. No final set of plans turns the structure into one coherent design. The honest account must therefore resist 2 temptations. It cannot repeat the supernatural legend as fact. It cannot replace that legend with a new claim that pretends to read her private thoughts. The better question is not whether Sarah Winchester was haunted. It is how a changing house, an unusually independent owner, a private household, a damaged building, and a commercial tourist site were compressed into one irresistible tale. To answer it, we have to begin before California, before the mansion, and before anyone called the property mysterious. Sarah Lockwood Pardee was born in New Haven, Connecticut in 1839. Her family called her Sally. New Haven was not merely the place of her childhood. It was a compact world of kinship, manufacture, craft, churches, commerce, and property. Her father, Leonard Pardee, worked in the carriage trade and operated a wood shop. The family link to making was practical. Wood was measured, cut, joined, shaped, finished, priced, and sold. A house was not simply a symbol. It was an object produced through labor and judgment. In 1862, Sarah married William Wirt Winchester. William was the only son of Oliver Winchester, whose business interests had moved from men's shirts into repeating firearms. That transition placed the family name on one of the most recognizable products of the 19th century United States. The company that became Winchester Repeating Arms was part of an industrial system that joined patents, machine production, finance, war, settlement, advertising, and global sale. Sarah did not marry a completed legend. She married into a family business, still establishing its name and succession. She and William also entered married life during the Civil War, when American manufacturing and American death were expanding together. Yet the later claim that Sarah spent her life in personal remorse for everyone killed by a Winchester rifle is not supported by a surviving confession, letter, or diary. It assigns a modern dramatic motive to a woman who left no such testimony. What is documented is loss. Sarah and William's daughter, Annie Pardee Winchester, was born in 1866 and died a little more than 5 weeks later. Their household remained without another surviving child. Oliver Winchester died in 1880. William, already ill with tuberculosis, died in March 1881 at the age of 43. Sarah was widowed in her early 40s. These deaths mattered. They changed the structure of her family and the control of property. They do not give us permission to invent a scene in which grief becomes a curse. Grief can alter a life without producing the particular supernatural bargain that later storytellers supplied. William's estate and his holdings in the firearms company left Sarah wealthy. The most sensational accounts repeat a fortune of $20 million and an income of $1,000 every day. Those figures are difficult to reconcile with the estate and stock details recovered by modern biographical research. The precise total changed as shares, dividends, later family inheritances, property, and valuation changed. The central fact does not depend on the largest number. Sarah possessed assets and income on a scale that gave her rare freedom to buy, build, revise, invest, travel, support relatives, and say no. That last power matters. A wealthy widow could act in her own name. She could hire lawyers and foremen. She could purchase land without designing her decisions around a husband's career. She could also close her gates, decline interviews, and allow strangers to be offended by her silence. 19th century newspapers found wealthy women useful characters. An heiress could be admired, resented, ridiculed, pitied, or treated as evidence that money had escaped proper control. A widow who spent freely but explained little offered even more material. Sarah's fortune made the house possible. Her refusal to interpret it for the public helped make the mystery profitable. After William's death, Sarah traveled. Family members also moved west. By 1885, she was in California, a state advertised through climate, land, agriculture, health, and opportunity. The move later became the first act of the occult story. A medium supposedly ordered her to leave New England, travel toward the setting sun, and build a refuge for spirits. Modern investigations have not found contemporary evidence for that consultation. The family geography supplies a documented context. Several of Sarah's sisters and their households were connected to California. Her move did not isolate her from kin. It placed her nearer relatives who would remain part of her life. Her niece Marion Merriman, known as Daisy, would live with her at the San Jose estate for 15 years. This was not the migration of a solitary woman abandoning every human tie. It was part of a wider family movement. California also offered something New Haven could not. It offered room. The Santa Clara Valley of the 1880s was an agricultural landscape of farms, orchards, roads, small towns, and rapidly appreciating land. San Jose was connected to San Francisco by rail and commerce, but properties beyond the city still gave an owner acres on which a home, ranch, service buildings, gardens, and staff housing could develop together. In 1886, Sarah bought a 2-story farmhouse near San Jose. The house was not yet the tourist site now known around the world. It was a modest starting structure on a rural property. Sarah called the place Llanada Villa. Over the following years, that farmhouse expanded through rooms, wings, towers, passages, service spaces, decorative schemes, and repeated revisions. The phrase, "built continuously," has become so closely attached to the project that it often escapes inspection. In legend, it means crews worked every hour for 36 or 38 years without a meaningful pause under a death sentence. In real building work, continuity can mean something looser. One job follows another. A room is changed. A wing is begun. Materials arrive. A contractor stops. Repairs interrupt expansion. A plan is rejected. Work moves elsewhere on the estate. The surviving letters include references that complicate the claim of an unbroken round-the-clock operation. The dividing line is not trivial. Perpetual supernatural labor has no end except Sarah's death. Long-term remodeling can have many ends. It can house relatives, improve comfort, employ trusted people, test an idea, use new technology, display a material, solve a drainage problem, respond to illness, repair damage, or satisfy an owner who enjoys making buildings. No one of those purposes explains every room. Together they describe the kind of project that Llanada Villa became. Sarah brought unusual resources to an ordinary architectural habit. Owners have always altered houses. They enclose porches, move walls, join rooms, add bathrooms, change stairs, replace kitchens, and abandon mistakes. Most people are stopped by cost, land, family objection, building codes, resale value, or the need to finish. Sarah had more money, more land, more control, and less need to make the house legible to a future buyer. A familiar practice could therefore expand to an unfamiliar scale. Scale is one source of the mansion's power. The present site describes a structure of roughly 24,000 square feet and uses the conventional count of about 160 rooms. It lists thousands of windows and doors, dozens of stairs and fireplaces, multiple kitchens, and a complex roofline served by chimneys and skylights. Those totals help a visitor grasp the building, but they should not be treated as the inventory of one unchanging moment. Rooms were divided and joined. Upper stories disappeared. Later owners repaired, restored, and interpreted the property. Even the act of counting requires a date and a definition. The house was largest before the earthquake. During the 1890s, its major expansion carried parts of it to 7 stories. Historic photographs show a vertical building with towers and balconies that no visitor can enter now because they no longer exist. The lost structure was not imaginary. It is visible in the photographic record. So is the ambition. Llanada Villa used the vocabulary of late Victorian design without submitting to one finished composition. Roofs break and restart. Windows differ by size and pattern. Bays project from walls. Decorative woodwork changes across elevations. A smaller building remains embedded inside later work. The house records decisions in layers. That is one reason a walk through it feels unlike a walk through a mansion designed once by an architect, approved by a client, and executed toward a single finish date. At Llanada Villa, a visitor moves through accumulated versions. An exterior wall becomes an interior boundary. A window that once admitted daylight may face a room added later. A staircase may belong to a circulation route that was superseded. The house preserves revision in 3 dimensions. Revision can look like confusion if the earlier draft is invisible. Sarah's role in design was exceptional, especially because she was a woman directing a major private building project during the late 19th century. She hired skilled labor and sought advice, but the evidence and house tradition both place her at the center of decisions. She selected, rejected, altered, and supervised. The result should not be romanticized as the work of a solitary genius. Carpenters, masons, plumbers, painters, gardeners, metalworkers, suppliers, foremen, and household staff turned choices into rooms. Nor should it be dismissed as random simply because it lacks the unity expected from a named male architect. The mansion contains fine materials and deliberate decoration. Stained glass, patterned wood, hardware, plaster, tile, and custom details show care in the details. For years, one set of stained glass windows was casually credited to Louis Comfort Tiffany, a name that increased their glamour. Repair work later found evidence identifying the Pacific American Decorative Company instead. The revision is small, but it illustrates the larger problem. A beautiful object acquires a famous story. Retelling hardens the story. Only close work on the object returns the credit to its actual maker. Sarah's house has needed that kind of revision again and again. The present building also contains systems associated with modern domestic comfort. Plumbing, heating, elevators, call devices, water systems, and carefully arranged service areas have all been used to describe it. Some features changed over time, and some received later names or interpretations. The broad pattern is firm. This was not a primitive shell assembled without practical thought. It was an expensive home in which technology, ease, and trial existed beside awkward transitions. The shallow staircases are a good example. The steps rise in very small increments, creating long switchbacks that have been nicknamed easy risers. They are often linked to Sarah's reduced mobility in later life. The exact medical story should be handled with care, but the physical function is plain. A smaller rise can make a staircase easier to climb for someone who finds a conventional step difficult. What looks strange at first glance may be an accommodation, yet usefulness alone cannot explain the whole building. Some spaces are elegant, some are compromised. Some reflect additions pressed against earlier additions. Some were altered after disaster. Some may record Sarah's taste, or a trial that did not work. Some have been interpreted so often that their original purpose is hard to recover. The lack of a final master plan is not evidence of a nightly command from the dead. It is evidence that the house developed as a process. The process already drew attention while Sarah was alive. On February 24, 1895, the San Francisco Chronicle published the first known story suggesting that she continued building to avoid death. The date is crucial. The haunted answer was not invented wholly after the house became a tourist site. Its seed existed while the mansion was growing. But a newspaper claim is evidence that a story circulated, not evidence that the story was true. By 1895, the ingredients were ready. There was a wealthy widow associated with firearms. There was a large and visibly changing house. There were workers coming and going. There was limited public access. There was no statement from the owner that neatly explained the work. A reporter could connect the facts with superstition, and every new tower or passage then appeared to confirm the answer the newspaper had supplied. Sarah did not issue a public rebuttal. Her silence may have protected her daily life, but it gave the story room. Rumor works especially well when the subject refuses the bargain of publicity. The public asks for a confession. The private person offers none. The absence is treated as proof. In 1911, another newspaper called the mansion a house of mystery. The phrase arrived before the formal tourist name. By then, The building no longer needed to be seen from within. Its exterior, its building work history, and Sarah's reputation could sustain the tale at a distance. Distance protected the fantasy from ordinary details. From the road, workers became anonymous hammering. Behind the gate, relatives disappeared. Ranch accounts vanished. Deliveries had no purpose except building work. A practical meeting with a lawyer became less interesting than a séance that left no paper. To move closer, we have to leave the public road and enter the estate as a workplace. Llanada Villa was not only 160 rooms, it was land. Over time, the property expanded beyond the original farmhouse parcel. The acreage supported agriculture, including orchards, and demanded the routine work that agricultural property always demands. Trees had to be planted, pruned, irrigated, protected, harvested, and accounted for. Animals, vehicles, fences, roads, pumps, roofs, and tools required care. Supplies entered. Produce and waste left. Weather mattered. That material world survives most clearly through people the legend reduces to the builders. One of them was John Hanson. From the late 1890s until Sarah's death in 1922, Hanson served as ranch foreman and became a trusted operational figure on the property. He lived on the estate with his wife, Nellie, and their sons, Carl and Theodore. The family did not merely pass through. The boys grew up there. Hanson kept daybooks. Those books, preserved with family photographs at History San Jose, document work on the ranch and record Sarah's comings and goings. Their survival is one of the most important facts in the story. The mansion's popular mythology imagines a secret nightly plan transmitted from spirits to carpenters. The daybooks preserve a different rhythm, the written rhythm of ranch work. A foreman's notes do not reveal everything said in a household. They reveal what had to happen for the place to function. Work had dates, people had assignments, materials had destinations. The estate existed through retelling that was not mystical at all. A gate opened, a wagon arrived, a task was finished, a repair waited, a member of the household departed or returned. This evidence changes the scale of inquiry. Instead of asking only why a staircase turns, we can ask who maintained the road that brought its lumber. Instead of imagining Sarah alone in an interior chamber, we can locate a family living on the grounds and a foreman recording the day's operations. Instead of treating building work as a spell, we can see it as paid work. The change does not make Llanada Villa ordinary. It makes its strangeness historical. Work is the part of a great house that public memory removes first. A mansion is presented as the creation of an owner, an architect, or a family name. Floors appear polished without a hand on the cloth. Fires burn without coal or wood. Water arrives. Meals cross a threshold. Gardens remain controlled. Carriages wait. When a building changes for years, this selective vision becomes impossible. Llanada Villa was made and remade by a workforce. The surviving names are incomplete, but the estate archive provides more than a vague claim that many people were employed. Hanson's papers bind labor to place. Family photographs show life on the grounds. Sarah's legal records and payments connect decisions to an administrative system. The house itself displays the skill of people who fitted wood, glass, metal, stone, pipe, wire, plaster, and paint into a structure that refused to stop changing. Continuous revision imposed a special burden on workers. In a conventional project, the crew advances from foundation to frame, roof, finish, and departure. At Llanada Villa, a finished surface might become the starting point for another room. A roof could become a floor. A wall might be pierced, enclosed, or redirected. Existing services had to be extended through new spaces. The craft was not only building work, it was adaptation. That labor helps explain why apparently irrational features cannot all be read as symbols. A doorway may be a remnant of an earlier route. A window may survive because removing it was unnecessary when an addition enclosed it. A staircase may have changed after a room above it changed. A builder working on an evolving house solves the immediate problem in front of him. Decades later, a visitor receives the solution without the problem. The visitor also receives the house without most of its people. The tourist site's celebrated room count can create an image of empty space spreading around one secluded widow. During Sarah's life, rooms had users and functions. Relatives stayed. Employees lived or worked nearby. Food was prepared. Laundry was handled. Horses and vehicles were cared for. Offices, storage rooms, kitchens, bedrooms, and service corridors supported different kinds of activity. Marion Merriman gives that household a human outline. Known as Daisy, she was Sarah's niece and moved to Llanada Villa in 1888. She remained for the next 15 years, leaving after her marriage in 1903. Those years overlap the mansion's greatest vertical growth. The young woman who lived there did not experience the place as a preserved maze. It was her aunt's changing home. Daisy's presence also unsettles the standard image of Sarah as a figure who withdrew from all family link after grief. Sarah valued privacy, and later illness narrowed her movements. Neither fact means she lived without durable relationships. Sisters, nieces, lawyers, physicians, managers, nurses, drivers, domestic workers, and laborers formed the social structure around her. Privacy and loneliness are not synonyms. The gap is important because the haunted widow story depends on emotional isolation. It asks us to picture a woman so detached from ordinary human bonds that only the dead can direct her. The household evidence does not permit that picture. Even where the intimate quality of a relationship is unknown, the relationship itself is visible through home, paid work, fortune, letters, and years of service. John Hanson remained through the end of Sarah's life. Long service does not prove that every day was harmonious. It does prove continuity that the caricature of a chaotic employer struggles to explain. Hanson was trusted with ranch operations. His wife and sons made a home on the estate. Sarah later remembered employees in her will. These are concrete ties, not the anonymous cast of a ghost tale. The workforce was also part of the local economy. Money spent on a changing mansion did not vanish into architecture. It became wages, orders, and business for people who supplied the property. The famous claim that Sarah built merely to postpone death strips this spending of every other consequence. It turns paid work into ritual, and workers into instruments of fear. The wider Gilded Age gives the spending another meaning. Industrial fortunes were being converted into houses, collections, landscapes, universities, hospitals, libraries, and trusts. Great families built country estates that required permanent staffs and complex systems. Some projects sought status, some created family seats, some offered controlled distance from cities. Many performed several functions at once. Llanada Villa belonged to that world, but it did not follow its cleanest rules. It lacked a single public architectural statement. It did not stabilize into a symmetrical monument that a family could display as proof of permanence. It remained personal, revisable, and difficult to summarize. That made it vulnerable to ridicule. A male industrialist who revised machinery for years could be called inventive. A collector who kept acquiring paintings could be called cultivated. A developer who assembled parcels could be called shrewd. A widow who repeatedly altered domestic space could be described as irrational because her field of action was a house. The gender of the building mattered to the story told about the builder. Scholar Amy J. Luke has examined how the mansion shaped Sarah's public memory. The house became more than her best-known possession. It became the answer of her character. Its difficult circulation was treated as a map of a difficult mind. Its unfinished spaces became signs of unfinished mourning. The domestic building and the woman were made to haunt each other. That reading still works because a house seems intimate. People assume that rooms reveal their owner in a way a factory, stock ledger, or office does not. A strange corridor feels psychological. A strange investment portfolio feels technical. Sarah left evidence in both forms, but only one became a national myth. Her letters with Samuel Franklin Leib restore the technical woman. Leib was a San Jose lawyer who advised her for many years. The archive associated with his family contains business and personal letters, deeds, mortgages, certificates of sale, banking material, canceled checks, receipts, tax documents, advice about financial holdings, and a copy of Sarah's will. It is a paper estate parallel to the physical one. The categories matter. Deeds locate ownership. Mortgages define obligations. Certificates of sale record transfer. Bank statements trace money through time. Tax papers place private wealth inside public systems. A will converts relationships into legal instructions. None of this resembles a woman fleeing arithmetic or reality. One digitized letter concerns an attempt to place a sewer line across Sarah's property. She wrote to Leib because she wanted to stop it. The dispute is wonderfully ordinary. It shows an owner protecting the use and boundary of her land through a lawyer. The person visible in that letter is not speaking in symbols. She has a practical objective. Managing property on Sarah's scale required that kind of care. A house may dominate photographs, but land creates questions in every direction. Where does a road cross? Who holds an easement? What parcel should be bought? What parcel should be sold? Who pays for access? Where can a utility be laid? How is an asset titled? Which relative receives income? Which advisor has authority? Sarah's wealth was therefore not a pile of cash feeding one building worksite. It was a changing arrangement of shares, income, real estate, trusts, expenses, gifts, and obligations. Her letters with Leib make administration part of her biography. It also helps us understand why the mansion could remain unfinished. To finish a house is partly an economic choice. A speculative builder finishes because payment or sale depends on it. A family completes a home because a move or public season requires it. Sarah did not need Llanada Villa to produce an immediate return. She could keep capital in the house while holding other property and investments elsewhere. She could revise a choice that another owner would have endured. This freedom had a cost. A highly personal building can become difficult to sell. Each addition may make sense to the current owner, while reducing value to the next one. The mansion could absorb expensive workmanship and still be worth less on the market than its materials and land implied. The problem would become acute after Sarah's death. During her life, however, resale was not the only measure. The house could provide occupation, comfort, privacy, family space, technical amusement, aesthetic pleasure, and a controlled environment. It could also allow Sarah to exercise authority in a domain where the law recognized her ownership, even when society treated her decisions as eccentric. The rooms contain evidence of aesthetic judgment. Decorative glass was commissioned. Woods were selected and worked. Patterns repeat and vary. The arrangement of light mattered. Fine objects filled the home. Museum professionals Janan Bomi and Michelle Wynne have emphasized Sarah as a collector and a patron of innovative architecture, while acknowledging how few records explain her motives in her own words. That combination is the honest center of the house. We can see sustained focus. We cannot turn focus into one secret formula. The legendary formula is attractive because it cancels ambiguity. If ghosts chose the plans, every error is intentional. If Sarah sought to confuse spirits, every dead end is successful. If death waited for silence, every hammer stroke has the same purpose. A story that appears to explain everything is protected from the evidence of any one room. Real design is less perfect. People try things. They dislike them. They change their bodies and habits. Technologies arrive. Guests leave. Families age. Workers offer advice. Materials behave unexpectedly. Earthquakes intervene. A house used for 36 years is not only designed, it is negotiated. Llanada Villa's practical features show negotiation with daily life. A modern water system had to serve rooms spread across a large footprint. Elevators reduced the need to climb. Call systems could connect the owner and staff. Service passages allowed household work to move through crowded architecture. Multiple kitchens and bathrooms met needs that changed as the structure expanded. Not every claimed innovation can be dated with confidence. Tourist language often collects every mechanical novelty into a portrait of Sarah ahead of her time. The safer conclusion is narrower. She spent on technology and ease, and the house was built as a functioning home, rather than a theatrical ruin. That function extended outdoors. The orchards were not painted scenery around the mansion. They produced work and, potentially, income. A ranch foreman was necessary because agriculture continued whether or not a tower was being altered. Trees did not wait for architectural inspiration. Their calendar came from seasons, water, pruning, and harvest. The Santa Clara Valley would later become known for silicon, but Sarah's landscape was agricultural. Fruit orchards covered land that would eventually hold subdivisions, roads, offices, and shopping centers. In that setting, a large ranch did not seem as detached from its surroundings as the remaining mansion seems today. Modern San Jose has moved around the house and made it appear like an ornate island. The estate's original scale has been reduced as completely as its upper floors. Acres were divided. Roads widened. Commercial development approached the boundary. The 6-acre historic complex now protected around the house cannot reproduce the working property that Hansen managed. Visitors encounter the architectural core after its economic landscape has been removed. This second subtraction matters as much as the earthquake. When orchards and service land disappear, the mansion looks less practical. When staff housing and work routes lose context, passages seem more mysterious. When a rural estate becomes a building beside busy modern roads, the owner seems to have chosen isolation in a form she never knew. Historical places survive unevenly. The part that earns attention is preserved. The systems around it are allowed to fade. At the Winchester property, mystery favored the mansion. It did not favor the ranch. The Hansen family photographs resist that narrowing. A camera pointed at workers, children, roads, buildings, and ordinary estate life captures what later publicity excluded. Even when a photograph cannot answer why Sarah placed a particular window, it proves that people inhabited the environment around it. The estate was not waiting empty for tourists. Sarah's support of relatives also extended beyond Llanada Villa. She owned or assisted with other homes and land. Her sisters and nieces formed part of her California network. She purchased a home in Atherton in 1910, closer to family, and moved between that home and the San Jose property. Her geography widened rather than collapsed into a single labyrinth. She also acquired waterfront land near Burlingame and commissioned a houseboat. Later Folklore gave the vessel a biblical motive and called it an ark prepared for another flood. A houseboat did not need that answer in the Bay Area. Wealthy people owned pleasure craft and floating residences. Sarah's interest in buildings could travel onto water without becoming prophecy. These properties reveal a repeated habit. She used money to shape environments for herself and people connected to her. Some projects were residential, some were agricultural, some were investments. The mansion was the largest and most visible expression, not an isolated compulsion. The pattern also weakens another popular idea, that Sarah's entire fortune moved directly from rifle dividends into a house she was forbidden to finish. Her assets were managed across categories. She bought and sold. She took advice. She arranged trusts. She protected boundaries. She redirected money toward medical care and public causes. The largest documented philanthropic commitment returned to New Haven, and to the disease that had killed William. In 1909, Sarah endowed the William Wirt Winchester Hospital for the treatment of tuberculosis. The site opened in 1918 and became connected to Yale's medical system. Its legacy continues in the Winchester Center for Lung Disease. This gift complicates the moral fable built around the rifle fortune. The common legend claims Sarah attempted to appease victims of firearms through endless building work. The documented memorial she created addressed tuberculosis through medical care. It carried William's name, but it did not turn private grief into a haunted spectacle. It converted wealth into beds, treatment, staff, and research. The dividing line is sharp. One story was assigned to her, the other was funded by her. Sarah also gave to other causes. Records connect her with the Semper Virens Club, part of the early campaign to protect California redwoods. She supported family members and people who had worked for her. Some gifts were quiet enough that they did little to change her public image. Privacy, once again, created an imbalance. The axe with paper trails remained in archives. The dramatic rumors circulated in public. Philanthropy should not be used to make her flawless. Wealth from an arms company carried the history of the business that produced it. Charity did not erase industrial violence. Nor does a hospital gift tell us what Sarah thought about every weapon sold under the family name. The point is more precise. When she chose a memorial response to death, the surviving response was medical and institutional, not supernatural. Her financial work grew more important as her health and living pattern changed. Physical limitations may have made the great San Jose house harder to use. The Atherton home offered another setting closer to relatives. After the earthquake, Llanada Villa's damaged spaces were not all restored. The ranch continued under Hanson's oversight, even when Sarah spent less time in the mansion. This is where the familiar timeline begins to break. The legend requires building to continue with the same urgency until the moment she dies. The property's later years show contraction, closure, upkeep, selective use, and effort elsewhere. Work did not simply stop, but the house no longer followed the clean supernatural rule. The reason was not a change in the spirit world. It was an event recorded across California on April 18, 1906. At 5:12 in the morning, the earth moved along the San Andreas Fault. The United States Geological Survey estimates the earthquake at magnitude 7.8. The rupture extended for hundreds of miles. San Francisco's fires became the disaster's most famous image, but destruction spread across the region. Buildings failed in San Jose and throughout the Santa Clara Valley. Chimneys fell, masonry cracked, water and transportation systems were disrupted. People died far beyond the city whose name the earthquake carries. Llanada Villa stood roughly 50 miles from San Francisco and much closer to other severe damage. Its height and complexity made it vulnerable. The 7-story tower collapsed or was left unstable. Chimneys fell. Upper sections were badly damaged. Most of the 4th floor and the remaining tower structure were later removed. We do not need to place Sarah inside a particular bedroom to understand the event. Retellings often say she was trapped and rescued by servants after hours. That scene is not secure enough to repeat as fact. The building damage is secure. It can be seen by comparing photographs and by examining the structure that survived. The loss altered more than the skyline. Architecture is a connected system. Remove an upper story, and the staircase below no longer reaches a destination. Remove a balcony, and a door becomes a hazard. Seal a damaged wing, and a corridor terminates abruptly. Take down chimneys and fireplaces become disconnected from their former roots. This does not mean the earthquake created every odd feature. Some unusual decisions predated 1906. Repeated additions already made the floor plan complex. Sarah's experiments and revisions had their own history. The earthquake then cut through that history and left fragments beside one another. The house seen today is therefore both additive and subtractive, Sarah added, for years. The earthquake and later owners took away. Repair stabilized selected states. Tourism emphasized selected routes. The apparent maze is an accumulation of all four processes. That is why the missing tower is such a decisive piece of evidence. It reveals a general danger in reading the house. A visitor sees a solid ceiling and assumes a stair was designed to meet it. The older photograph shows that the ceiling may belong to a later closure. The present endpoint is mistaken for the original aim. Once that error is visible, the mansion becomes harder to use as a psychological diagnosis. A wall can tell us that a wall exists. To decide what it meant to Sarah, we need its date, what stood beside it, who changed it, and what happened afterward. Without that sequence, reading becomes projection. The earthquake also tests the claim that Sarah had to build forever. A woman who believed her life depended on uninterrupted building work would have faced the strongest possible reason to rebuild the lost upper stories. She did not restore the mansion to its former height. Large damaged sections remained closed or were removed. Her use of the property narrowed. That choice does not reveal a new private motive. It does reveal that the most literal version of the legend fails against the building's own chronology. Building work was not a single sacred obligation that overrode damage, cost, health, and taste. Sarah could decide that parts of the house were no longer worth recovering. The decision may have been practical. Rebuilding a tall, idiosyncratic structure after a regional disaster would have required enormous work. The damaged house was already difficult to navigate and maintain. Sarah was in her 60s. She owned other property. The ranch could function without restoring every room. The change also fits a wider pattern after 1906. Sarah spent increasing time elsewhere, eventually using the Atherton house purchased in 1910. Relatives were nearer. A smaller home could reduce the physical demands of daily life. Llanada Villa remained in her property system, but it no longer had to be the center of every activity. John Hanson's role became even more important under those conditions. Accounts of the later estate describe the San Jose property continuing as a working ranch under his supervision. Sarah returned and used parts of the house, but closed spaces and damaged wings changed its domestic role. A giant home could become an agricultural headquarters without being fully abandoned. That middle state rarely appears in the ghost story. A haunted house is either occupied by its captive owner or deserted. A working estate can be partially inhabited, partially closed, repaired in one area and left unfinished in another. It can remain valuable through land and crops, even when the mansion becomes a burden. The earthquake created that burden by exposing the gap between cost and value. Sarah had spent heavily on materials and labor. Those expenditures reflected her choices while she owned and used the place. A buyer, however, would value the property according to different needs. The buyer would ask what the land could earn, what the building would cost to repair, and whether its floor plan served a market. A custom house preserves its owner's preferences more effectively than it preserves the money spent on them. The more personal the building, the greater the risk that no next owner wants it at the same price. Llanada Villa became intensely personal through revision. Rooms were shaped around a household that no longer existed after Sarah's death. Decorative work could be valuable as craft while being hard to sell as a whole. The size demanded upkeep. Damage demanded capital. The agricultural acreage could be divided and sold more easily than the mansion could be converted into a conventional home. These later economics help explain the building's final transformation. Before 1922, the mystery story was a way outsiders interpreted private spending. After 1922, mystery became a way to make the difficult building produce income. Sarah's life before that sale should not be rushed. Her later years contained more than retreat. The surviving files show continued work with money and property. She arranged trusts and transfers. She corresponded about legal matters. She managed the practical consequences of wealth, even as her physical world changed. Her use of expert help is visible throughout. Leib handled legal and investment questions. Hansen supervised ranch work. Physicians and nurses became part of the household. Skilled tradespeople handled building work. This was not weakness or passivity. Large estates operate through delegated responsibility. The owner's power appears in the selection of agents, the instructions sent to them, and the ability to retain or replace them. The archive's most revealing portrait of Sarah is distributed across these relationships. There is no single dramatic autobiography. There are repeated decisions. A property is protected. An asset is discussed. A worker remains for years. A relative receives support. A hospital receives a fortune. A damaged tower is not rebuilt. That last decision deserves more attention because absence is difficult to narrate. Tourists can be shown a staircase. They cannot be shown the money Sarah declined to spend on recreating a vanished floor. They can be led to a door that now opens over a drop. They cannot stand on the balcony that once received it. The tourist site, therefore, presents the result more easily than the process. Physical oddities become durable props. Historical sequences require explanation. A guide can point and say, "nowhere" in a second. To say, "formerly somewhere" requires a photograph, a date, and a patient visitor. The word "nowhere" contains the whole marketing advantage. It converts damage into aim. It makes the owner responsible for a joke that time may have written. Other features received similar stories. A small interior room became a séance room. The number 13 was collected across windows, steps, hooks, and decoration until coincidence and later alteration appeared to form a code. Interior openings were described as devices for spying on workers. A houseboat became an ark. Privacy became evidence that Sarah feared being seen. Each story follows the same method. Begin with an unusual object. Remove its changing context. Attach a motive that cannot answer back. Repeat the link until the object appears to prove it. The séance story is especially powerful because it supplies the missing design process. If Sarah met spirits at night, no architectural plans need survive. The lack of plans becomes evidence of secret instruction. If she entered alone, the lack of witnesses becomes evidence of intimacy with the dead. The absence of proof is made to protect the claim from testing. Historical work cannot operate that way. A missing diary is a limit. It does not authorize the most vivid replacement. The absence of evidence for séances does not establish every belief Sarah ever held. It does prevent a responsible narrator from describing regular supernatural conferences as fact. There is also a social problem with the famous scene. 19th century spiritualist practice was often communal. People gathered in parlors, formed circles, watched mediums, exchanged messages, and participated in a public religious culture. The image of Sarah alone in a cramped secret room, receiving building work orders like a supernatural contractor, resembles later haunted house entertainment more than documented practice at Llanada Villa. The curse story has a similar ease. It binds Sarah directly to every death caused by a Winchester weapon without requiring evidence of her political or moral views. The business supplied her wealth, so later storytellers supplied guilt. Her grief made that guilt emotionally plausible. The house gave it a visible scale. Yet the documented memorial to William did not take the form of a weapon museum or an altar to unnamed spirits. It took the form of a tuberculosis hospital. Sarah directed major resources toward the illness that killed him. That choice is not proof that rifles never troubled her. It is proof that later narrators chose the less documented grief because it made the better haunted house. Sarah's own silence gave them little resistance. She did not invite reporters through the rooms and explain each decision. She did not publish a defense of her sanity. She did not preserve a known diary for historians. Her private papers, if they survived beyond her niece, have not provided the missing master answer. Silence can be an exercise of control during a life, and a surrender of control after it. Sarah kept strangers outside her gate. She could not keep their story outside the property after she was gone. The press had already established the frame. The 1895 Chronicle story tied building work to the avoidance of death. The 1911 Examiner phrase, "House of Mystery," gave the building a compact image. Later articles repeated and enlarged the tale. Details accumulated because each writer inherited a ready-made plot and needed a fresh room inside it. The retelling shaped what visitors expected to see. Once a person enters a mansion believing it was designed to confuse ghosts, every turn becomes evidence. A normal window is ignored. A door beside a changed floor plan is photographed. A carefully finished cabinet becomes less memorable than a narrow stair. Selection performs the haunting. The process resembles the mansion's physical construction. Stories were added room by room. One roomer enclosed another. A later feature opened into an earlier claim. Contradictions did not weaken the structure because complexity was part of the attraction. There were, for example, several possible supernatural motives. Sarah built to evade death. She built to house spirits. She built to confuse spirits. She built to appease the people killed by rifles. She built because a medium told her to. Those claims do not form one stable instruction. They form a flexible mythology, capable of absorbing any new oddity. Flexibility made the legend commercially useful. A single disproved detail would not collapse it. If one window was not Tiffany, another could still carry mystical numbers. If the earthquake explained one stair, another corridor remained unexplained. The house contained enough rooms to outlast revision. Correction also faced an emotional disadvantage. A balcony was removed is a physical answer. A widow built a door for ghosts is a character, a fear, and a danger in one sentence. Public history must work harder because evidence is often less compressed than folklore. The solution is not to drain the mansion of wonder. It is to move the wonder. The house is remarkable because one woman controlled enough capital to treat architecture as a long experiment. It is remarkable because scores of workers adapted old fabric to new ideas. It is remarkable because a catastrophic earthquake turned a 7-story composition into a lower, broken survivor. It is remarkable because an agricultural estate became an urban tourist landmark. It is remarkable because the story told to save it also distorted its maker. Those are not smaller mysteries. They are larger histories. By the 1910s, Sarah's world was distributed between properties, advisors, relatives, charitable commitments, and the damaged San Jose estate. The hospital in New Haven opened in 1918. Europe had been at war. Influenza was moving through communities. The United States that emerged from the First World War was not the country in which she had married during the Civil War. The firearms company had changed as well. The Winchester name remained powerful, but corporate control and industrial conditions did not stand still. Sarah's wealth connected her to that company, without making her the manager of every weapon it produced. Her image in popular memory narrowed, even as her financial life remained broad. Age narrowed other choices. Movement through an enormous house demanded effort. Thousands of surfaces demanded care. Closed rooms protected damaged sections, but also separated Sarah from the project that had defined her public image. The shallow stairs and elevators could ease movement, but technology could not make 7 lost stories return or make a 24,000 square foot house simple. The mansion was becoming a remainder while she was still alive. That does not mean Sarah stopped valuing it. She returned to the property. It remained hers. Its ranch continued. Its contents stayed under her control. It means the building's role changed. A place can be beloved without remaining the center of daily life. The gap between ownership and occupation is another fact the legend flattens. The popular Sarah must remain inside the maze because the plot depends on captivity. The documented Sarah could move among properties because wealth created alternatives. She could instruct a foreman from elsewhere. She could leave a damaged wing shut. She could make the house wait. In the final years, she took steps to control what would happen to people and money after her death. Her will included relatives and trusted employees. Her niece, Daisy, received personal property and financial provision. Trust arrangements extended support and linked remaining funds to the hospital. These decisions joined private affection, legal structure, and institutional legacy. The building itself was not transformed into her memorial by the will. Its future would be decided through the market. Before that market takes hold, it is worth making one last walk through the property Sarah still owned. Not the ghost tour, not a list of marvels detached from dates. A walk from the outside inward, asking what each kind of space required from the people who used it. Begin at the roof. The present roofline is crowded because many smaller roofs meet. Each joint had to shed rain. Each valley had to carry water away. Gutters and drains had to serve walls built at different times. When a new wing met an old one, the seam could become a leak. A fanciful skyline therefore created plain yearly work. Below the roof, scores of windows admitted light into rooms that grew deeper as more space was added. A window on an outer wall could become an inside window after the next room enclosed it. Leaving the glass in place might carry light through two rooms, preserve a decorative piece, or simply avoid needless removal. Its odd place need not have been its first place. That same rule applies to doors. A door records a route at one moment. If the porch, stair, room, or balcony beyond it changes, the door can outlive the route. Removing every obsolete door would also erase earlier craft and force more work. A wealthy owner, able to tolerate quirks, might leave the trace. Now look at the walls. The farmhouse at the center was not cleared for a clean foundation. Later rooms wrapped it. Parts of an older exterior entered the growing interior. This is how a house keeps its past without displaying a museum label. The layers do not line up because the first builders did not know what the last builders would add. The effect can feel like a puzzle, but it is also a timeline. Straight paths tend to come from one plan. Crooked paths often come from several plans forced to share the same frame. The stairs reveal the body as well as the plan. A standard stair gains height quickly. Sarah's shallow steps trade height for distance. They turn back and forth because a gentle rise consumes more floor. A visitor looking for a prank sees too many steps. A person who finds high steps painful may see a usable route. This reading does not require a firm diagnosis. It begins with the shape of the object. The steps reduce the lift demanded from a knee and hip. The user travels farther but climbs less at each move. The long path may be strange in a compact house. In a vast house owned for personal use, ease could outweigh economy. The elevators make the same point with machinery. They also reveal the burden of height. A house of several floors must move bodies, linens, food, fuel, and goods. One machine may serve a resident. Another may serve the work that keeps that resident comfortable. Vertical travel is both a private need and a staff task. Call systems placed another network inside the walls. A button or signal could summon help across distance. Such devices were common signs of wealth because they let an owner command labor without walking to find it. They were useful, but they also mapped rank. The person pressing and the person answering did not occupy the house in the same way. Service routes carried that split into the floor plan. A guest could pass through finished rooms, while food, dishes, ash, linen, and cleaning tools followed other paths. The strange inner geometry may contain both the owner's experiments and the need to keep work moving behind formal space. Multiple kitchens suggest change in scale and use. One may serve daily meals. Another may sit near a later wing. A smaller setup may spare staff a long trip. A kitchen may lose its role when the household shrinks. The count alone cannot tell us which rooms worked at the same time. Bathrooms pose the same dating problem. Plumbing added over years must follow water and waste lines that the first farmhouse did not have. A new bath may appear awkward because it was fitted where pipe could reach. Modern comfort often enters an old house through compromise. The sewer letter sent to Leib places that private system inside a public map. Waste did not vanish when it crossed an outer wall. Pipes, land, neighbors, and public works met at the boundary. Sarah's effort to block a line across her land shows that even the largest house could not be managed as a sealed world. Water also tied the mansion to the ranch. Orchards need far more than a decorative fountain. Pumps, tanks, wells, and lines had to serve soil and household. The estate's water system joined crops, kitchens, baths, fire risk, and gardens. A broken pipe or dry season could matter more on a work list than a curious door. Fireplaces and chimneys show another shared system. A visitor can count hearths room by room. A builder must carry smoke safely above a roof that keeps changing. When the earthquake felled chimneys and upper walls, a fireplace could remain after its full shaft had gone. The hearth would then preserve only the lower piece of its former use. Heat had to be distributed through a very uneven home. Rooms on the outer edge faced different weather than rooms sealed inside later wings. High spaces lost warmth differently from low ones. A system extended during each round of work would bear the marks of each round. Electric light brought new wire into old walls. The house crossed an age when American homes moved from lamps and gas toward electrical service. Any building worked on for decades became a meeting place for old and new tools. Llanada Villa had more walls in which that meeting could occur. Technology can be made into another legend. A device is called far ahead of its age, and Sarah becomes a lone inventor. That is rarely needed. Buying and adapting a new device already tells us something. She watched what money could obtain and gave workers the task of fitting it into a difficult house. The fine glass tells a parallel story about taste. Colored panes shape light without offering a practical shortcut. They cost money because beauty mattered. When repair staff found the maker's mark that displaced the Tiffany tail, the discovery did not strip Sarah of judgment. It placed her choice within a real California trade. The maker matters for the same reason the foreman matters. Great house stories tend to attach every object to the wealthiest or most famous name available. A Tiffany label sounds better than a less famous workshop. Sarah's name sounds larger than those of her carpenters. Good research moves credit back toward the hands and firms that earned it. Woodwork makes those hands hard to ignore. A board had to be milled, delivered, cut, fitted, and finished. A curved trim piece required more care than a straight one. A stair rail had to meet the hand. A cabinet had to fit its wall. The mansion's odd whole contains thousands of exact joins. That contrast is easy to miss. The plan can be awkward while the craft is skilled. A room can sit in a strange place and still contain careful work. Calling the entire house mad insults the workers as much as it insults the owner. It also hides how instructions likely moved. Sarah could set an aim, sketch an idea, point to a model, reject a result, or ask a craft worker for a fix. The crew then had to turn that exchange into measurements. No spirit needed to supply a full drawing. Building sites run on talk, marks, samples, and repeated checks. Few of those daily exchanges would enter a formal archive. A foreman's daybook catches the edge of the process, not every spoken order. This is why the lack of a complete plan is not surprising. Working papers can be discarded. Chalk lines disappear. People who know the site carry facts in memory until the crew breaks apart. The house kept more of that memory than the files did, but the earthquake tore pages from the physical book. Roofs fell, floors were cut back, broken parts were cleared. Any drawing that once matched the 7-story form could no longer guide a visitor through the survivor. After the quake, closing a damaged wing was itself a design choice. A wall or locked door could keep people away from risk. A roof could be lowered to cover what remained. A stair could be capped. The work aimed at safety and limited use, not at restoring the old picture. Sarah had reason to choose that smaller aim. The ranch could still run. She had other homes. The tallest parts had proven frail. Her own needs were changing. The money required to remake the tower could serve more useful ends. One of those ends stood across the country in New Haven. A tuberculosis hospital does not offer the visual drama of a 7-story mansion, but it consumes capital in a more direct way. Land, wards, doctors, nurses, equipment, heat, food, and long-term care all had to be paid for. Sarah moved money from private holdings into that work. The hospital also closed a family circle. William died from tuberculosis. The gift used his name to support people facing the same disease. It gave grief a public form without telling us that grief designed a single corridor in San Jose. The distinction protects both parts of her life. The house can remain a place of private meaning. The hospital can stand as the documented public memorial. We do not have to force the first to perform the role clearly served by the second. Return to the ranch road. A daybook entry about Sarah leaving or coming back may look small beside a tower. It does something the tower cannot. It proves movement. She was not fixed inside the mansion by the tale later told about her. A trip required people and equipment. A driver prepared a vehicle. Horses or a motor car had to be ready. Gates opened. Luggage or papers might move with her. The daybook need not describe every item to show an estate responding to her schedule. Hanson's work continued when she was elsewhere. That fact turns the ranch into a system rather than a stage. The owner could be absent while crews pruned, repaired, hauled, and watched the grounds. The property had a clock of its own. The staff clock differed from Sarah's. Workers arrived, left, ate, rested, and raised families. Their wages tied them to her fortune, but their lives were not contained by her story. The Hanson boys grew up and preserved photographs that later became part of the site's history. Children once knew the estate as home ground, not as a haunted brand. Their pictures ask us to imagine the property at human scale. A child on a road, a worker near a field, a family beside an outbuilding. These are not invented scenes. They are the kinds of subjects the surviving albums hold. The photos pull the eye away from the facade and toward the world around it. That world included women whose work is even harder to trace. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, nursing, sewing, and personal care could fill every day without producing grand plans. Some workers lived nearby, others came and went. Names appear unevenly because archives favor legal papers and managers. The lack of a full staff role must not turn those workers back into ghosts. Their tasks can be known from the kind of home they kept. A room used for meals creates dishes. A fireplace creates ash. A bed creates linen. Thousands of windows create glass to wash. The building announces labor even when it withholds a name. Sarah's later need for nursing added another kind of work. Care narrowed the gap between private room and workplace. A nurse or secretary could help with movement, letters, purchases, and daily needs. Dependence on such help did not end Sarah's control of money or land. Bodies can weaken while judgment remains active. This is another point where the myth takes an easy path. Physical limits, grief, privacy, and old age are folded into madness. A secluded room is treated as a cell. A long stare is treated as a joke. The people providing care vanish, leaving Sarah alone with spirits. The material house argues for care instead. Gentle steps, lifts, signals, staff routes, and selected rooms made a large property usable. Some features may date from different years, but together they show people adjusting the place to bodies and work. Adjustment is not a lesser form of design. It is what design becomes when life refuses to remain fixed. Sarah's other properties made further adjustment possible. The Atherton house did not carry the same public burden. It placed her closer to kin and inside a more manageable setting. The houseboat offered another form of retreat. Each choice reduced the claim Llanada Villa made on her days. From the outside, this shift could look like flight from a cursed house. From the files, it looks like an owner using several assets. The ordinary reading becomes stronger because the properties were bought, managed, and transferred through the same business network visible elsewhere. Her letters to Leib are the hinge. They do not describe spirits, they describe tasks. Even where only catalog notes are public, the range of the files is clear. Sarah needed advice about land, shares, tax, cash, trusts, and sale. A lawyer answered because the questions belonged to law and finance. The mansion's walls could not perform that work for her. Paper did. The paper trail also corrects the idea of wealth as a daily fountain that never ran down. Holdings change price. Dividends vary. Property costs money. Staff are paid. Taxes arrive. Gifts leave the estate. A large fortune offers reach, but it still requires choices among uses. Popular figures such as $20 million and $1,000 a day turn wealth into magic. The disputed totals feel exact, while hiding when assets were received and how they were valued. Sarah's power is clearer when described through acts. She could buy a ranch, keep workers for years, own several homes, endure a damaged mansion, support kin, and fund a hospital. Those acts are large enough. They do not need the biggest number repeated on a brochure. The same restraint should govern the room count. About 160 rooms tells us the place was vast. A claim that Sarah alone knew the true count offers a better riddle but weaker knowledge. Rooms can be counted differently after walls move. The puzzle belongs to the building history, not necessarily to the owner's mind. By 1922, the house held all of these layers: farmhouse, mansion, damaged shell, partial home, ranch base, family archive, and future showplace occupied the same address. Sarah's death would not choose one layer. The new owners would. Sarah Winchester died at Llanada Villa on September 5, 1922. The date ended her control over the house. It did not immediately create the object visitors know now. First came appraisal, removal, division, sale, and the practical problem of what to do with a mansion too strange, damaged, and expensive for an ordinary buyer. The answer would not come from Sarah. It would come from the people who recognized that the story attached to the building might be worth more than the building as a home. Death emptied Llanada Villa in stages. Personal possessions were separated under the will. Furnishings were removed. Land was surveyed, divided, and transferred. A working property held together by one owner's decisions became an archive of assets, with different buyers and different futures. This is the point at which many accounts repeat another perfect image. The house was said to be so baffling that appraisers could not count its rooms. The furniture supposedly required trucks moving for weeks because each route through the maze ended in confusion. Such details may sound plausible inside the legend, but they should not replace the documented process of dispersal. A large furnished estate would have been difficult to clear without needing supernatural architecture. The central economic problem was real. The land had value. The mansion was harder. It was enormous, damaged, costly to maintain, and shaped around decades of personal alteration. Its fashionable moment had passed. A buyer who wanted a modern California home could build something smaller and more convenient. A developer could divide acreage. Salvage might recover materials. The house, as a house, had limited appeal. Its reputation offered another use. John and Mamie Brown entered the property's history in 1923. The current institutional timeline describes their initial plan as a recreation park that would include other attractions on the grounds. They did not begin with a century-long blueprint for a historic house museum. They leased a property and tested what the public wanted. The public wanted the mansion. Their arrival changed how the rooms were used at once. A private home asks whether a path serves the people who live there. A tour asks whether the path can carry a group, hold its focus, and return it safely to the exit. Railings, signs, locked doors, staff posts, and chosen stops begin to shape what the public calls the house. The first guests also entered a site with no long tradition of care as a museum. The owners had to decide which rooms could open, which tales a guide would tell, and which objects best held a crowd. Those early choices were practical, but they also set habits. A feature that earned surprise was likely to stay on the route. Each guide inherited a difficult job. The floor plan could not explain itself quickly. A crisp story helped move people through it. Sarah changed this room many times for reasons we do not fully know. Is honest, yet it leaves the group without a neat image. Sarah built this to fool a ghost, gives the room a role at once. The neat line also travels well after the visit. A guest can repeat it at dinner, print it under a photograph, or use it to persuade a friend to buy a ticket. The careful answer needs its dates and limits. The ghost line needs only the door. That gap helps explain why the tale grew even when files were available elsewhere. Archives and tours reward different kinds of knowledge. A deed may settle who owned a parcel, but few guests plan a trip around a deed. A locked room creates a question before anyone says a word. The strongest tour could have joined both. Show the odd room, then show the old roofline. Name the legend, then date its first newspaper form. Point to the ranch gate, then read Hanson's plain note about work. The wonder would remain, but the guest would leave with causes as well as claims. For much of the 20th century, spectacle held the easier advantage. Americans met the house through magazine features and television segments that needed a quick hook. Halloween gave the story a yearly season. Horror films could borrow the mansion's outline without carrying its land deeds. The brand grew through every retelling. Meanwhile, the valley changed around it. Orchard Rows gave way to streets and buildings. The road took the Winchester name. The mansion that had once belonged to a wide rural tract became a landmark beside dense city life. Its survival looked more miraculous as its first setting vanished. That new setting strengthened the sense of enclosure. A visitor could cross from shops, traffic, and modern walls into carved wood and crowded roofs. The sharp contrast made the house feel cut off from ordinary time. Yet the modern city was not an intruder in a timeless scene. It was another chapter in the sale and reuse of the land Sarah once held. The commercial blocks around the site are therefore part of the same story. Her acreage was not frozen with the house. Parcels found buyers and new uses. The mansion endured because touring gave it a use that subdivision could not match. Seen from above, the result is stark. A small protected island keeps the ornate core. The orchards that made the ranch legible are mostly gone. A person studying only the island may think Sarah designed the house to repel the world. A person who restores the lost acreage sees a landholder operating within a farm valley. The ghost story thrives on the island. The estate story needs the map. That is why Hanson's books, Leib's files, and old photographs are not side material. They restore the missing map in pieces. The house tells us where walls stand. The files tell us how far Sarah's control reached and what kinds of work passed through it. Tours opened on June 30, 1923, less than a year after Sarah's death. The present operator reports that roughly 10,000 people came on the opening day. The exact count comes through the site that grew from that business, so it should be understood as part of its documented corporate history. Even without treating the number as a turnstile audit, the course is unmistakable. Curiosity was large enough to reorder the plan. That demand solved the mismatch between the mansion and the real estate market. As a private home, the house had too many rooms, too much damage, and too personal a plan. As a tourist site, those liabilities became inventory. A confusing route prolonged the tour. A door without a destination produced a story. A sealed wing suggested secrecy. The expense of upkeep could be supported by admission. The building did not need to be comfortable for one family. It needed to be unforgettable for thousands of visitors. This conversion created a new kind of finish. Sarah had left the house without a final architectural ending. The tourism business gave it a narrative ending. Every room could now belong to the same plot about fear, spirits, and endless building work. The structure remained physically irregular, but the legend made it conceptually tidy. During the 1930s, Winchester Mystery House became the formal marketed name. Llanada Villa, Sarah's own name for the property, receded. The change placed mystery in the image visitors bought before they entered. It did not describe one interpretive option. It branded the building. A brand must be repeated. Brochures, postcards, newspaper features, roadside promotion, guide scripts, souvenirs, radio, television, books, and later films carried the story outward. The mansion no longer depended on a person passing its gate in San Jose. A photograph of the facade and a sentence about a haunted heiress could travel together. Sarah's image traveled too. One of the few photographs commonly associated with her shows a small, older woman seated in a carriage, partially veiled. The image is useful to a mystery because it withholds more than it reveals. A painted or retouched portrait can be placed beside the sprawling house, and the size contrast does the storytelling. The woman looks vulnerable or secretive. The mansion looks like the enlargement of something she will not say. The same photograph can support another reading. Sarah is in a vehicle, outdoors, within a managed estate. The camera captures a property owner in motion. The veil may express ordinary privacy rather than terror. An image does not contain its caption. Tourism supplied captions for a century. The most effective captions were specific. The séance room, the door to nowhere, the stairway to the ceiling, the spy window, the 13th bathroom, the houseboat called Sarah's Ark. Specificity gives folklore the texture of documentation. A visitor remembers the object and assumes the answer has the same solidity. Some objects were modified after Sarah's death. Others received names or functions that cannot be established during her lifetime. Still others were genuine features whose dates and contexts changed. The tourist route blended these categories because every object served the same experience. That blending is not unique to San Jose. Historic houses often balance preservation, storytelling, income, and expectation. They must pay for roofs, fire protection, conservation, staff, access, and research. Visitors usually arrive because they already know a famous version of the past. If a site removes that version too abruptly, it can remove the reason many people came. The Winchester property faces this problem in its purest form. The myth helped save the house from teardown or conversion. Admission revenue supported its survival. The phrase that distorted Sarah also made the building economically legible. Preservation and false story became partners. In 1974, the house received recognition as a California historical landmark and was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Official descriptions emphasize its Victorian craftsmanship, architectural character, engineering interest, and extraordinary scale. Landmark status places the building within public history, but it does not erase the commercial image through which most visitors encounter it. The result is a site with two forms of control. It is a preserved historic resource containing original fabric and documented changes. It is also an entertainment business whose success has long depended on mystery. Those roles can support each other, and they can pull in different directions. Recent institutional work has shown that revision is possible, without destroying fascination. When conservators investigated decorative glass, long attributed to Tiffany, they found physical evidence identifying another maker. The discovery returned credit to the Pacific American Decorative Company. The windows did not become less beautiful. They became more precise. The same principle can guide the larger story. Removing an unsupported séance does not make the house less strange. It makes room for Sarah's actual design practice. Explaining earthquake damage does not make a stair less arresting. It connects the stair to one of the most destructive events in California history. Naming John Hanson does not diminish Sarah. It restores the labor through which her choices took form. Precision adds people. The archive is essential because the tourist house cannot preserve every context inside its walls. History. San Jose's Leib family archive holds the legal and financial residue of Sarah's life. Its Hanson material holds daybooks and photographs from the working estate. Yale preserves the institutional memory of her hospital gift. Calisphere makes selected letters and images visible beyond the archive. These collections distribute Sarah's biography across places that the haunted house story rarely visits. Together, they produce a woman who is more difficult than the legend and more capable. She was born into a family of craft and commerce. She married into an expanding industrial fortune. She endured the deaths of her infant daughter and husband. She inherited enough wealth to make choices unavailable to most women and men. She moved west within a family network. She purchased land. She directed building work. She employed people. She managed investments. She funded medical care. She guarded her privacy. She left a house whose unfinished state invited others to speak for her. None of those facts proves she was never superstitious. Human beings can be practical and hold private beliefs. The problem is not that the supernatural is logically impossible. The problem is that the famous claims about nightly séances, a command to build forever, and a curse from rifle victims lack the kind of contemporary support required to narrate them as her motive. When evidence stops, a story should identify the boundary. That boundary does not leave us with nothing. The documented causes of the house's form are substantial. A farmhouse was expanded rather than replaced. Design proceeded through repeated revision. Money reduced the pressure to finish. A large workforce translated ideas into fabric. Family and household needs changed. New systems were inserted. Health and mobility affected use. An earthquake removed upper stories and damaged wings. Sarah chose not to rebuild all of them. Later owners adapted the property for tours. No ghost is needed to produce a maze from that sequence. Still, sequence alone does not tell us why Sarah enjoyed the process, or what emotional meaning particular rooms carried for her. Architecture may have offered pleasure, control, distraction, commemoration, or all of them at different times. Grief may have shaped her life without dictating every floor plan. Money may have enabled trial without explaining taste. Privacy may have protected her without indicating shame. The house can support a plural answer because people act from plural reasons. The legend insists on one master key. Historical reality offers a ring of smaller keys, each opening a different part of the property. The deed opens control. The stock certificate opens financial freedom. The foreman's daybook opens the ranch. The family photograph opens domestic life. The earthquake image opens the missing floors. The hospital gift opens Sarah's public giving. The 1923 business decision opens the tourist business. The one key that does not survive is Sarah's complete private answer. This absence has often been treated as a failure of history. In fact, it is part of responsible history. Not every person leaves a confession. Not every building has one aim. A life does not become available for any story merely because its owner chose silence. Sarah's silence became especially vulnerable because of the kind of woman she was. She had money without a living husband. She exercised control in domestic space. She did not perform public sociability on demand. Her body changed with age and illness. Her house refused the straight lines through which visitors expected rational control to announce itself. Newspapers and later attractions converted those facts into a recognizable female type. She became the mad widow, trapped by grief, wasting money on compulsive domestic labor. The story disciplined her power by making it pathological. Her fortune no longer represented freedom. It represented the scale of her delusion. The rifle added a moral charge that other eccentric mansions lacked. An industrial fortune could be made to generate its own ghosts. Every victim of a Winchester weapon could be imagined traveling to San Jose. The house became a supernatural account book in which Sarah paid an endless debt. This was narratively efficient and historically unfair. Sarah benefited from the company wealth. That link belongs in the story. But turning her into the sole spiritual debtor for an entire weapons economy removes the manufacturers, managers, governments, soldiers, purchasers, and markets that made the business powerful. It condenses industrial history into one widow's supposed guilt. It also replaces what she did with what she allegedly feared. Her legal work disappears. Her investments disappear. Her support for relatives disappears. Her hospital disappears. The ranch disappears. Even the carpenters disappear, because the spirits receive credit for the plans. Restoring those people and systems does not absolve inherited wealth. It gives the wealth a history large enough to examine. The house itself benefits from the same expansion. Treated only as a maze, it becomes an archive of punchlines. Treated as a changing estate, it becomes evidence of how buildings grow, fail, and acquire new uses. Its awkwardness is not an embarrassment that revision must smooth away. The awkwardness is the archive. An interior window may preserve an earlier exterior. A blocked opening may preserve disaster response. A repeated motif may preserve aesthetic taste. A long stair may preserve adaptation to a body. A service passage may preserve work. A repaired pane may preserve modern conservation. Each feature asks for a date before it asks for a legend. Dating is difficult because the project produced layers faster than later historians could document them. Plans are incomplete. Photographs capture selected elevations at selected moments. Tour narratives changed. Repair uncovered evidence hidden under paint, plaster, or later work. The current house is both source and suspect, because its fabric has been handled by many owners. This is why exact totals should be held lightly. 160 rooms is a useful public count. It is not a magical constant. What counts as a room? At what date? Before or after the fourth floor was removed? Before or after tourist spaces were adapted? The number feels definitive, while the object it describes has never been still. The number 13 works in the opposite direction. It invites a visitor to count selectively and then assign aim. 13 panes or steps can be memorable, but the house contains thousands of countable elements. In a building of this size, patterns will appear. Some may have been chosen. Some may have been altered later. Without provenance, arithmetic cannot become biography. The séance room creates a similar illusion of exactness. Give a small room a name, and its function seems settled. Yet a room's later label is not the same as evidence of its use. To establish repeated nightly séances, we would expect contemporary testimony, diaries, letters, schedules, or credible household recollection. The staff who knew Sarah did not leave support for the famous ritual. The absence matters because the ritual is not a minor ornament. It is the engine of the standard plot. Spirits advise Sarah. Sarah instructs builders. Builders make the maze. Remove the first link and the entire causal chain loses its evidence. What replaces it is not a blank. Sarah herself replaces it. She had an interest in architecture and design that predated California. She possessed capital and control. She had access to skilled workers and materials. She owned a house long enough to revise it repeatedly. She could accept results, reject them, or begin again. The building arose from human decisions even when the complete motives behind those decisions are not preserved. This is the least sensational answer and the most radical one. A woman built the house because she had the means and the will to keep building. That sentence should not be mistaken for simplicity. Means came from an industrial fortune with a complicated legacy. Will changed through grief, family life, pleasure, illness, disaster, and age. Building depended on other people's bodies and skills. The house altered a landscape and consumed resources. Its survival depended on a business that sold a distorted version of its owner. Every word opens another room. The tourist site's success demonstrates how public memory is made. It is not simply a false story imposed once. It is a repeated exchange. A business offers mystery. Visitors arrive wanting mystery. Their attention rewards the features that fit it. Media repeat what audiences recognize. New generations encounter the story as if it had always belonged to the building. Revision enters the same exchange more slowly. A historian finds an estate valuation that contradicts a popular fortune. An archivist catalogs a ranch daybook. A conservator identifies a stained glass maker. A scholar compares tour rhetoric with women's public memory. A photograph of the missing tower is placed beside the present roofline. The story changes fact by fact. The house has begun to hold both versions. Its official materials now acknowledge the lack of definitive records about Sarah's motive. They present the 1895 newspaper article as the beginning of a story, rather than as proof. They describe the earthquake and the removed floors. They celebrate repair and employee history. At the same time, paranormal events and the mystery brand remain part of the business. That tension is honest to the site's history, even when it is uncomfortable. The legend is now a historical fact because people have believed, sold, filmed, and repeated it for more than a century. It should be studied as folklore and commerce. It should not be smuggled backward into Sarah's private life as documented truth. The dividing line allows the ghost story to remain culturally important without making it biographically sovereign. It also clarifies what Sarah's house can teach beyond one person. Buildings do not preserve neutral memory. Owners change them. Disasters change them. Markets decide whether they remain. Curators select routes. Labels tell visitors what to notice. A physical survivor can carry an inaccurate story more effectively than a lost building carries an accurate one. Llanada Villa survived because it could be sold as extraordinary. Many more coherent Victorian houses disappeared because they offered no comparable hook. The very features that made Sarah look foolish helped save her work from teardown. That is the final paradox. Myth displaced the woman, then preserved the evidence needed to recover her. Without the haunted tourist site, the mansion might have been divided, stripped, burned, or replaced as the valley urbanized. Without the mansion, the public might never care about the Leib papers, the Hansen daybooks, the hospital gift, or the lost 7-story tower. The false story kept the door open long enough for revision to enter. We should not be grateful for the false story. We should recognize the mechanism. Commercial stories often preserve selectively. They save the object that can earn attention and let the harder context fall away. Later historians inherit both the building and the damage done to its meaning. The work of repair is not to produce a spotless heroine. Sarah Winchester was a wealthy property owner, whose choices rested on unequal access to capital. She benefited from an arms fortune. She directed labor on a scale most people could never command. Her privacy sometimes prevents us from judging choices we would like to understand. She was also more than the passive recipient of wealth. The papers show careful financial work. The estate shows years of direction. The hospital shows deliberate giving. The will shows planning. The houses show a repeated engagement with land and design. These truths can exist together. A tangled history does not require a curse. Return now to the stair that stops. The first glance asks what kind of woman would build a staircase to nowhere. The older photograph asks a better question. What used to stand above it? That change in question is the gap between a legend and an investigation. The legend begins with Sarah's alleged madness and forces the house to illustrate it. The investigation begins with a changed object and reconstructs what happened around it. Above the present ceiling were rooms and roof lines damaged in 1906. Around the mansion were acres of ranch land worked under a foreman. Behind the owner were lawyers, relatives, workers, banks, companies, and institutions. After her death came lessees, visitors, guides, marketers, conservators, and scholars. The house points in all of those directions. It never pointed only to ghosts. Why then did Sarah Winchester keep enlarging Llanada Villa? The most accurate answer is that no single surviving document can close the question. The evidence supports a group of causes. She had long-standing interest in architecture and fine objects. She had money and legal control. She could revise without selling. The house served a changing household and estate. Building work gave form to taste and offered continuing work. Later changes answered health, technology, and circumstance. The earthquake then ended some possibilities and created many of the discontinuities that visitors inherited. How did that working estate become a haunted maze? Newspapers supplied a supernatural motive while Sarah was alive. Her privacy prevented an easy rebuttal from dominating. The earthquake removed the context of physical features. Her death removed her control over reading. The new operators discovered that mystery could turn an unwanted mansion into a successful tourist site. Retelling joined the woman and the legend until they seemed inseparable. The answer is not as compact as a curse. It is stronger because each part can be tested. The mansion survives as a record of capital turned into wood, glass, labor, and land. It survives as a record of disaster. It survives as a record of what tourism can save and what it can erase. Most of all, it survives as the contested public image of a woman who rarely offered the public an image of herself. Sarah's documented life does not need the spirits to become compelling. She inherited industrial wealth and exercised unusual freedom. She built on an immense scale without securing a final answer for anyone else. She employed families, managed property, funded medical care, and allowed an architectural trial to remain open for decades. Then an earthquake cut away its upper rooms, and a business built a legend through the gaps. The house was never one thing. It was a home, a workshop, an estate office, a ranch center, a costly asset, a damaged survivor, and a tourist product. Each role altered the next. The woman was never one thing either. Widow is true, but incomplete. Heiress is true, but incomplete. Builder, employer, investor, aunt, patient, patron, and philanthropist belong beside it. Haunted belongs to the history of what others said about her. In the end, the Winchester Mystery House preserves two inheritances. One is the popular mansion of endless stairs and restless spirits. The other is Llanada Villa, a changing property whose papers and scars reveal how wealth was used, how work was organized, how a disaster rewrote architecture, and how a private woman lost control of her public memory. The first fortune made the house famous. The second finally brings Sarah Winchester home.